Today is going to be on the environmental impacts and effects of our diets. Awesome. So when it comes to our food, we need to be able to sustain and feed over 7 billion people in this world, right? And it's something that we partake in, if we're lucky, 3 times a day, if not more. And so food is a very important part of our culture. And it's something that doesn't get a lot of consideration when it comes to the environmental effects of our consumption patterns. And so what I'm going to be highlighting today is actually bringing some awareness to some of the stats and facts around the effects that our choices and consumption can have on the environment. And I'm going to be talking about some of the facts on a global scale and also bringing things down to a regional and national scale as well. So what I'm going to be focusing on today is current common food items, which include meat, dairy and eggs. And so these products fall under the animal agriculture banner. So the animal agriculture industry is the livestock sector. It's the industry that, as I said, produces milk, eggs, dairy and a whole bunch of animal products. Now, a lot of the information that I'm going to be presenting to you today isn't necessarily the most readily available. It does take a bit of hunting down, but hopefully my intention is to inform and explain things to you guys, give you some understanding and awareness that will hopefully empower you to make decisions that align with your values and what you find important. So I'm going to be discussing the industry as a whole. We're talking about the collective global industry, which is inclusive of small-scale, organic farms, all the way up to the factory farms. So I'm going to be highlighting the whole sector. So when it comes to environmental impacts of the animal ag sector, it takes a very big toll on land. So what we need to do, we actually, most of the time, need to clear land, which we then either put the animals on directly where they'll graze off pasture, or we're clearing land to put animals on, and then clearing land somewhere else to grow the food to give to those animals. So it's not just about where the animals are, it's all the whole system that's linked up to get those animals fed. And we're talking about almost 60 billion land animals a year. And so this does require a lot of food and water and resources to feed these animals. And then obviously we're getting products from them. So when it comes to the effect of land, in Australia, 56% of our total land is just used for grazing. So I was quite surprised when I came across statistics like this, because it really shattered my understanding about what's happening in terms of the land use here in Australia. Now we can see all this beige area, that's grazing on native vegetation. And we can see it's really taking up a lot of space here. And this orange section, all through here, this is grazing on modified pastures. So all of this land is what the animal agriculture sector is utilising here in Australia. Now there's a little bar chart over on the right hand side. We can see grazing is the #1 land use in our country. We go down to natural environments, and interestingly just down here, this is the portion of land that we're using to grow all of our plant foods here in Australia. So it does take a lot more land when we're focusing on the production of livestock products than it does plant-based foods. And you can see the amount of area that's used for forestry is much smaller, animal feed, urban settlements, factory farms, mining, we can't even see there. So, just before I move on, so approximately a third of Earth's total ice-free land is actually used for the animal farming sector. It's using a lot of the space on our planet. Now bringing this to a regional context, so have you guys heard there's currently a massive deforestation crisis happening here in Queensland. Many environmental organisations are campaigning very heavily to address the issue of deforestation. Now this information that I've got in this infographic is based off a report which came out last year, but it's actually based on the deforestation between 2015 and 2016. Now in that year, we cleared almost 400,000 hectares of land. Now just to make this relevant for you, this is the size of the Gabba every 3 minutes. And so we look at, wow, that's a lot of land. What is this all going to? And interestingly, I found out that 0.75% of all this land cleared was for the mining sector. I expect it to be a lot more. Infrastructure, so roads, that sort of stuff, only accounted for 0.5%. When we go to the settlements and our cities that are growing and rural areas that are expanding, that only accounted for 0.25% of all that land cleared. Now, the thing that shocked me the most is that 93.4% of all that land cleared is actually for animal farming. It's actually for the production of livestock, which really challenged my understanding and education I had coming through Griffith, because I wasn't given this information, which was quite concerning. And so, in Australia and across the world, animal agriculture is actually the leading driver of deforestation and species loss. And we need to understand that a lot of the beef production in Australia, in Queensland, is exported. So it's about 2/3 is exported, and 1/3 is, for domestic supply and demand here in Queensland. So the way the land is cleared, and it's been happening for decades and decades and decades, is essentially having 2 trucks or tractors and dragging a chain through the forest. Now this, as a result of all this land clearing, WWF have estimated that clearing in Queensland kills about 34 million native mammals, birds and reptiles every year. This is year on year on year. And if you go back 10 years ago, we're still clearing on average around 400,000 hectares a year. And the main driver is animal agriculture. It's not cities that are expanding. And of course we have species that are displaced, like the poor little koala here, very, very common sight. So because we do have 57 billion land animals on this planet for farming, they obviously do a lot of poos, right? And so we have so much waste that's been created by livestock across the world, which is just astounding. It's quite challenging to comprehend. And so in the United States, the amount of animal waste is 130 times more than all the human waste in the US. 130 times more. And obviously the US is a hub and a very big sector for animal agriculture, and not every country's statistics are like this. So it just goes to highlight how profound the effect is. Now, 3.1 million kilos of crap is created each minute over in the States as a result of this. Now, where does this go? It goes onto our land, it goes into our waterways. We use that water to drink from, we use that water to spray our crops, and grow our plant-based foods as well. And so we do have all this waste which is going into our waterways and polluting our environment. And we have, it's an excessive amount of waste just sitting in our environment. And yes, things do break down, but when we're talking about the magnitude and scale of the amount of waste being created, it doesn't just disappear, and it continues to have a very detrimental effect on our environment and our ecosystems. So a farm with only 2,500 dairy cows actually creates the same amount of waste as a city of over 400,000 people. And so look at the population of the Gold Coast. So it would take, 5,000 dairy cows to create the same amount of waste as everyone on the Gold Coast. And majority of the time there's no laws which require farmers to treat all of this waste. So it just sits in the environment, goes into the waterways, it's crazy. So we've got a lot of waste being created by all these animals, but there's also a massive effect in terms of water, in terms of the quality, and also the consumption of water for the animal farming sector. And so across the globe, around 1/3 of global fresh water is actually used for the animal agriculture sector. Domestic use within the household, there's only a very small portion which actually goes towards dishwashing and showers and stuff like that. The majority of our water use within a household is actually through our diets. But because we don't see the effects of the food on our plate, it's hard to comprehend what's actually happening. So the idea is to just draw your attention to what's happening beyond our fridge, beyond the supermarkets, and try to get us connected back to country, back to land, just so we can actually see what's happening out there. So this was an older statistics from about 5 or 6 years ago, but I encourage you to question all the statistics and facts I give you today. It's very important that you do your own research and don't take for granted that I'm giving you the most accurate thing. But as a scientist, we want to do our best to give you accurate, up-to-date information. That way you're empowered with the stats and facts to go out there and make a difference. So 67% of all the water in Australia is used for agriculture. Now that's not just animal farming, we're talking about the whole agricultural system, the plant-based foods for humans and the food grown to give to livestock. Of that, 43% is just used for pasture and hay production for grazing animals. So how much of our water in this country is just going to grow food for animals, which we're putting so much more calories and protein in terms of feed than we're actually getting out in terms of edible protein from animal flesh, from meat, right? So it is a very inefficient system. So this is some of the most alarming statistics I found was when I started to look into the effects of the livestock sector in climate change, and it really challenged my understanding of the way things work. And a lot of these statistics I only started researching after I'd finished my degree. I spent 4 years at Griffith studying this information and didn't come across a lot of this, which is very, very concerning. So some of the most conservative estimates say that the global transport sector accounts for about 13% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Now, this was an estimate done by the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, very good authority on this. They estimated back in 2006 that animal agriculture accounts for 18% of all global greenhouse gas emissions. That's more than all the boats, cars, planes, trains, ships on this planet, right? So we don't hear a lot about this. We often hear about fossil fuels, climate change, renewable energy, but we need to start moving away from that and look at one of the other drivers of climate change, which I'll argue today by showing you some facts that may not be what we think. So it's all about what data we put in and potentially what result we're after. So there's a group called World Watch Institute. They did some different modelling that built upon the United Nations estimates, threw in a couple of factors. For example, when the FAO went to calculate their footprints, they didn't include a lot of information about land use. So all the greenhouse gases that's coming from utilising land, and we know so much land is being cleared for this sector. They didn't include the fermentation and essentially the cow farts and all this stuff coming from livestock. When we bring that into account and add a few more things, World Watch Institute estimated that 51% of our global greenhouse gas emissions is coming from the animal farming sector. When I started reading into this information and looking at these reports and watching documentaries about this information, I was quite concerned. Ended up crying myself to sleep because this challenged the way I saw the world. It challenged the way I went about my environmentalism and how I did my bit to minimise my footprint here on the planet. Now please check out the report. I encourage you to get to the nitty-gritty and see how they calculated this information. Here in Australia, what we've got is a group called Beyond Zero Emissions. And what they did back in 2014, got the emissions data from this country and had a more comprehensive model. So they included all the land use, all the enteric fermentation, all the burning of the forest, and clearing of all these trees. And when we include the land clearing, all the waste products from livestock, our national greenhouse gas emissions double to around 33–34%. That's using the government's models of calculating things. But when we look at greenhouse gases, it's not just carbon dioxide. Water, for example, H2O is actually a greenhouse gas. Methane is a very effective greenhouse gas as well, so is nitrous oxide. And within the farming sector, carbon dioxide isn't the most potent greenhouse gas coming from the sector. It's actually methane and nitrous oxide. And we know that livestock are creating so much methane through their waste. And so methane is about 80 to 100 times more destructive as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So a lot of the models we see when it comes to calculating and estimating the effect of greenhouse gases our contributions by different sectors, are done on a 100-year time frame. You often hear the scientists saying, we're modelling on 100 years and this is the global warming potential of this industry. We don't have 100 years to act, guys. We need to be taking action today that's having a quick effect and you know, diversifying the way we are doing things on this planet. And so when we look at things on a 20-year time frame, which is what BZE in their report did, they came out that 54% of our nation's greenhouse gas emissions is coming from agriculture. And I'd just like to highlight, this isn't just animal farming, but over 85% of these emissions is coming from livestock. So here in Australia, my opinion at the moment, and reflected across the world in other countries, that animal farming is the single biggest driver of climate change, and it beyond rivals, you know, the energy sector and the power production. So we need to start maybe decoupling climate change from fossil fuels and look at other contributions. So I think it's an injustice to talk about the environmental effects of the animal farming sector without addressing the animals themselves. They are a part of the environment just like we are. We're not separate to the environment. And so this is some of the most hard-hitting stuff that I did find during my research. So in Australia between 2017, and for those who can't see these numbers, would anyone like to have a guess as to how many animals are killed in Australia in 3 months? Any guesses? A lot. Not a lot.
100,000.
100,000, a million.
10 million.
How much? 40 million. In 3 months in Australia, 170 million animals have lost their life due to animal farming. So, what we, out of all, if we were to kill humans at the rate that we kill animals in 5 days, we would be extinct. Almost 60 billion animals are killed each year for our consumption of animal products. Now, this is mind-boggling, and it's very hard to connect to these stats, but we need to understand that these are lives within the sector. And some of the interesting things are down here. The majority of this is chickens, almost 160 million chickens, right? So, lambs, you know, 5.5 million lambs. Sure.
Does that number of chickens include the male chicks that are killed?
That I'm not sure. So it's a very important question. So one thing we aren't aware of. So the reason why it says here there's over 100,000 calves that are killed is that in the dairy industry, the male cows are actually a byproduct because males don't create milk, so they're of no use to the dairy sector. And so in Australia, it's actually legal to kill these calves within their first day of being born using blunt force trauma. That's the RSPCA approved method of humane slaughter. Very crazy to find out. And so that's why we have calves dying. And what was your name, sorry? And as Christine said, within the egg sector, we have baby male chicks which are ground up alive to supply free range and cage that system. So it's very, very crazy. Anyway, we're going to move on and get back to the animals at the end. So my brief summary is that the animal agriculture industry is an absolute ecological disaster. Animal farming is, contrary to what I believe, it's actually the single largest driver of deforestation and species loss. The largest driver of ocean dead zones, water pollution, consumption of these resources. And so when I started researching these things, I wasn't aware of the effect of this industry is having on our planet. And I was quite frustrated when I found out all this information. And so I'm here today to share that and hopefully empower other people with the same facts and knowledge and understanding to go and challenge the way things have been. And so, yeah.
Why is that not taught in our universities?
I'd love to chat about that at the end. Yeah. So now, with this industry, the industry exists because we as consumers are demanding their products. So the reason why all the land is being cleared is because we are demanding beef products, which means the farmers go and clear the land. Now we've had legislation changes to address the animal ag sector, to address land clearing this year. There was a recent bill in Queensland. However, the reason why this land is being cleared isn't because the law is necessarily weak. It's because the farmers are providing a product to a consumer, which is us, and as a result of the consequences of our demand, this is what's happening. So we play a very, very important role in this system, and it's not about, it just comes down to connecting to the consequences of our choices, right? So how do we minimize the effect of this sector? It is destroying the planet. And yes, there are livelihoods involved in terms of farmers and all of this, and that's very important to consider. Now, the United Nations, back in 2010, said that a global shift towards a vegan diet is vital to save the world from hunger, fuel poverty, and the worst impacts of climate change. This is the United Nations saying this. Now, I wasn't aware of this. This was well before I started my studies, and I wasn't aware of this report and the suggestions that are being put forward. So, having gone through my environmental studies and having shorter showers and riding my bike and using public transport more, I was like, but I didn't think that my diet had a massive effect on my footprint, but it really, really does. And we need to be aware of that and confront that with open hearts, right? And so this is saying we need to tackle consumption. We need to look at shifting demand away from these products, because as I said, the more we demand, the more this happens. The less we demand, the less the impacts are. And of course, we can look at within the farming sector, technological advancements, look at ways of capturing greenhouse gases. They're even genetically modifying animals to create less waste and grow faster and this sort of stuff. But I really don't think that's a sustainable and practical way about addressing this issue. And I really think we collectively have so much power and influence in addressing this. So, vegan diet, plant-based diet, this is what the United Nations is saying. Now, I didn't quite understand what what that meant. And so going through, looking at what is a plant-based diet, because these things get thrown around, but I'd just like to highlight to you what that actually is. So a plant-based diet is based on a variety of delicious, nutritious plants. We actually have over 70,000 edible plants on this planet, and I've probably only eaten maybe a dozen, over my life or something crazy. My diet, a few years ago, I was eating a lot of meat, eggs and dairy and animal products, and wasn't really diversifying what I was eating. And so when I decided to adopt a plant-based diet a few years ago to minimise my footprint, I wanted to know what's out there, what can I eat? It sounds a bit crazy, this whole veganism thing, but we'll chat a bit about that at the end. So it means no meat, fish, eggs, milk, butter, gelatin. And it's about focusing on fruits, nuts, legumes, grains, and plant-derived substitutes. So, for example, I used to eat so many chicken schnitzels, and there's vegan chicken schnitzels, plant-based alternatives, so we can substitute those products with plant-based options. And because we are substituting them with plant-based options, the environmental footprint of those products is much lower. Now, this isn't to say that every plant-based food has a small footprint. No, you look at things like almonds and soy, the creation of soy, the water that goes into that is phenomenal. But in the Amazon, in the US actually, 80% of all the soy that's grown is actually given to livestock. So yeah, soy can be a pretty destructive monoculture, but it's given to livestock. 91% of the land and destruction in the Amazon is because of animal farming, not because of mines and dams and mega projects. It's the farming of livestock. And so that's what a plant-based diet is. This is just some examples of delicious plant-based foods: nachos, burgers, chips. All the things that we value so importantly in our culture and in our lives. We can have as substituted plant-free product, animal-free plant-based products. Alrighty, so looking towards some interesting developments, we have companies like Beyond Meat and the Impossible Burger that are creating products that bleed and taste and smell like actual animal flesh, like meat. Now, I know a good steak when I want to eat one. I know what it looks like. I know how you cut it. But we can have the same thing without the animals and the suffering that goes into that product. And this is what the United Nations is advocating for. Swap to these plant-based alternatives to minimise our footprint. And it's not about making it zero, just like to highlight that. Everything we do is going to have an effect, have an impact, but it's just about minimising that as much as we can. And so the Impossible Burger uses 0% cows, uses a fraction of the Earth's natural resources. So compared to a cow like a hamburger or beef patty, it uses 95% less land, 75% less water, and creates 80% less greenhouse gas emissions. Wow, how good's that? So I'd just like to highlight, this was some research which focused on footprints by diet type. And so what we've got a meat lover, which I was a few years ago, a heavy omnivorous diet, lots of meat, eggs and dairy. And then we're comparing that to an average diet, a no beef diet, vegetarian, and then a vegan diet. And we can see that a heavy meat intensive diet has a massive effect, massive contribution to climate change. And yes, it is just that one meal, but as I said, there's 7 billion people and it's 3 meals a day over and over and over. This stuff totals up faster and more profoundly than we can ever imagine. And so over on the right hand side, we do see that a vegan diet has the smallest CO2 footprint per person. And as I said, it's not about going zero, ideally sure, but we need to accept that there's aspects of our lives where there is going to be land cleared for our houses and for our settlements, and there is going to be land cleared for our plant-based foods and this sort of stuff, but it's just about minimising that as best as we can. So when it comes to water use, one hamburger is equivalent to 2 months worth of showers in terms of water. So when it comes to councils and governments advocating, minimise your water footprint, I know when I first moved to Queensland from WA in like 2007, 2008, massive droughts. Do you guys remember the timers that they gave us? They said, here's your 3 or 4 minute shower timer, turn that and you have a 4-minute shower and that's it. If only I knew back then that that one hamburger, there's so much water that's gone in to create that product. The water, as we saw before, the water that's used to grow the plant-based foods, which are given to livestock, which are then consumed by people, the water that livestock consume directly, and the water used in processing and all this sort of stuff, that's what we're dealing with. And so we need to be seeing more recommendations and advice that says, okay, you want to minimise your footprint in terms of water use, eat less meat, eat no meat. It's totally feasible and possible for us to do that. So very, very crazy stuff. Now you'll see estimates that will say like 50,000 litres for a kilo of beef, 80,000 litres. Look into all the stats yourself. This is one infographic that I pulled up, which from what I've read accurately reflects averages of what we're dealing with. So how do we address our environmental footprint when it comes to our diet? We all need to eat. We all need to be consuming something, of course. But we have the choice every single day with what products we are going to consume, what we're going to put into us. And we just need to understand the consequences of those choices and act in alignment with our beliefs. If we want to minimise our footprint, we need, what are our intentions and goals? So it was only, I'm 25 years of age now, it was only two or so years ago after I finished my environmental studies in science that I thought, I want to minimise my footprint, and so I'm going to cut out animal products completely. And going through that transition, it's great knowing that if we are, so this little infographic compares a heavy omnivorous diet, so lots of meat, eggs and dairy, to a whole foods plant-based diet. So none of the processed stuff like just hearty, plants, fruit, veggies, that sort of stuff. So a person who follows a vegan diet produces about 50% less CO2. You're going to use an 11th of the oil. We're going to be looking at a 13th of the water and 1/18 of the land used compared to that to feeding someone a heavy omnivorous diet. And so, as we saw in one of those first graphics, it's only about 3 or 4% of Australia's total land that's being used to grow all of our plant foods. Yet 56% of all the land in Australia is used for grazing livestock. So we can see it's very, very inefficient. We're putting in more protein and calories than we get out. It's not a very effective system. And so we can make a difference by eating less animal products, and I'm here to advocate that it's possible for us to do that completely. And reducing is a good step. It's in the right direction, but we can reduce our consumption of these products completely and even minimise our footprint so much more. Not to zero. A effective way for us to minimise our ecological footprint is to adopt a plant-based vegan diet. Now, I didn't want to believe that for years and years and years. Coming through my studies, I'm an environmentalist, I'm doing my bit, I'm having my showers shorter, I'm riding my bike more. This is the hard truth that I needed to accept. And so this is my truth that I think is a reflection of the facts and the way things are at the moment. And so this is my advice as an environmental scientist to you all. Yes, we can do these practical things and recycle more and this and that, but tackle the big things first. It's totally possible. So, vegan. Now, a few years ago, I get so angry and frustrated at this term, and I didn't quite understand what it was all about. I thought, bloody crazy tree-hugging hippies. So, I just asked you guys, if you'd like to raise your hand if you have heard of the word vegan before. So, half the group. Okay. So, when I was in school, I didn't really get what this is about. But so the plant-based diet that the United Nations is advocating for actually fits in well with the philosophy of veganism. So veganism isn't necessarily a diet, but it's a broader philosophy and a way of relating to the natural world that I feel is very, very important. And it's a way that we can actually start transforming our culture to minimise our footprint, for example, through adopting a plant-based diet. But there's many facets to veganism. So what veganism is about? Veganism is a philosophy and way of living which seeks to exclude, as far as is possible and practicable, all forms of exploitation of and cruelty to animals for food, clothing, or any other purpose, and by extension, this promotes the development and use of animal-free alternatives for the benefit of humans, animals, and the environment. And so, as I said at the start, there's almost 60 billion land animals that are being killed each year. And that's excluding the oceans. I'm a marine ecologist, and I know the oceans are in a very drastic position. 75% of our ocean's fisheries are actually overexploited, fully exploited, or depleted. Sustainable fishing, I must say, I personally believe it's an absolute myth, because how can we be sustainably fishing with dying oceans? And so this is where our demand and our choices as consumers can have a massive effect on what we do. Before I move on slightly, so when I was going through this research years ago and thinking, who am I, what do I believe in, what's my role on this planet, I want to be an environmentalist, what can I do? I started choosing the sustainable seafood, right? And so I wanted to eat the tuna, which was dolphin friendly. I wanted to eat the products which had the smallest footprint as possible. So I was only eating, for example, the last meat I was eating was like wild kangaroos and also fish that I was catching myself or spearing. When I found out that recreational fishermen in Queensland catch more than twice that of all the commercial fishermen in this state, it really shook me up. So it's not just about having a go at the commercial fishermen. They, again, are just providing a product to a consumer. If they happen to be using very destructive methods of exploitation and fishing, then obviously the footprint's going to be bigger. But we are driving these industries. It's our choices which are driving this stuff. And so after that, I thought there's no way I can contribute to protecting the oceans while I'm contributing to the issues as well. And so I went through my own personal questioning, and I encourage you all to do the same about these issues and topics, because I think it's very important if we are to move forward in an ecologically sustainable manner. Okay, so I've got a few more minutes. I'm just going to finish with a couple, just sort of bring things to a bigger picture perspective. So the best reasons we actually have for eating and exploiting animals is convenience, culture and our tradition, our taste, and for pleasure. I used to fish because I found pleasure in ripping a fish out of 20 meters of water, bringing it to the surface, putting a knife in its head. We are doing that because we think that there's so many reasons why we've eaten animals as a culture, but we're not eating animals because we need to. There's no necessity for us to consume animal products. And so what we're doing is supporting the animal agriculture industry, not out of necessity. A lot of people in the world will have to eat and hunt to survive. We don't live in those circumstances. We have shops and we have developed societies with options. So it's about minimizing our footprint as much as possible and not exploiting animals. Because I feel that if we are on this planet, we are another species. We are another member of the Earth community that has every right to be here. And we need to extend our respect and compassion to not only humans, but other members of the Earth community. And I feel that this is one of the most effective ways for us to do that as humans interacting on this planet. We have enough grain in the world to feed all of the world's hungry people. Except we give all that grain to animal agriculture, to the livestock sector. So there is actually a myth of scarcity of food. We have enough food. We have enough food and water on this planet to feed almost 60 billion animals. It's not that we don't have enough food and water. So really be critical about these claims that people are making. It's not enough food, it's distribution and efficiencies. So just to wrap up, I feel that we need to understand why things are the way they are. Why do we have this industry which is destroying the planet, and why do we support it? Well, the way we've looked at the world for a very long time, and the way our laws are set up, and the way our governments work, and the way industries work, they've been driven largely by a philosophy of human-centeredness. So it's a term called anthropocentrism. It just means human-centeredness. And so that puts humans' interests over the interests of everything else on this planet, living and non-living. And because of that, we see animals in this hierarchy. You know, the cute, cuddly, charismatic megafauna are the most important. Your tigers, pandas, lions, whales, dolphins, yay. And then our domesticated animals, our dogs, cats, this sort of stuff. Then we have food animals, and then less important animals like pests and rodents and this sort of stuff. It's all arbitrary ways of looking at the world. And I don't think they reflect the way our ecosystem should be best functioning. And so I think if we can look at a worldview where we see ourselves as an interconnected, interdependent part of this planet, where everything we do has a flow-on effect, then we won't be moving towards the exploitation of animals for unnecessary reasons. It's about shifting our worldview, and an aspect of that is our diet, is our consumption. And as I mentioned already, the quickest, cheapest, most effective way to minimize your ecological footprint is through shifting your consumption to a plant-based vegan diet. United Nations are saying this, I need to emphasize that again. So just wrapping up, this is a community too. Now, we often see things in terms of human worldviews and the way we relate to people and communities and societies, but we get a lot of oxygen from these guys. And our existence is dependent on healthy, functional ecosystems. So this forest, this is a community too. There's all this bacteria and little creatures running around, and birds and bees and geckos and all sorts of stuff. It's very, very interesting out there. So if we can step out of ourselves into another perspective, and perhaps look at the world in a different way. Not through our eyes, maybe through the eyes of non-human animals. Maybe through the eyes of a forest community that's been cleared for animal farming. Queensland is the largest driver. I really think that it will take a cultural transformation to address these issues, and our diet is a very important part of that, guys. And so I'd just like to thank you so much for your time and for your attention. Hopefully I've given you some interesting information to consider. Hopefully your awareness has slightly increased and you take something from this. If anyone is interested in connecting on any of social media platforms or getting in touch with any queries or any events to be involved in, my email address is here on Facebook and Instagram. If you just search @EarthCentered, then you can connect with me that way. But thank you guys so much for your time, and I'd just like to open it up to any questions from you guys. Yeah.
I didn't really want to ask you a question, but
Sure.
I just wanted to say that I'm a lifestyle medicine doctor, and all the evidence shows that type of eating is the best for you as well, not just the planet.
Thank you for that. And that's something I didn't mention. Thank you so much. What was your name, sorry? Sarah? Yeah, so the World Health Organization has listed processed meats and bacon as a class 1 carcinogenic compound just like smoking causes lung cancer, the consumption of those meat products causes bowel cancer. And so, yeah, health effects, plant-based diets, we're very, very good.
So why is it not taught in university?
So why is it not taught
We're
in
not a backward
universities?
country, surely.
In some ways, I think we are not regressive, but we're not excelling at the speed that we should be. So 4 years at Griffith University, I wasn't told about the animal farming sector to this extent. Environmental organisations, if you look at WWF, Greenpeace, ACF, you jump on their websites, you won't see much about the animal farming sector is the single most destructive industry on our planet. And these are all the facts. And yes, it's massive, but you're contributing to that through consuming those products. It's easier for us to sign a petition to stop, mining and promote renewable energy than for us to be like, okay, I actually want to make a difference. I need to go and change something that I do. So it really comes down to how can we get the most people on board, but get them to change the least amount, but enough so there's an impact, and then acknowledge, thank you for your donation, we've won this campaign. We have I personally believe we have an institutionalized suppression of information, right? So, nutritional information which tells us that we need to eat animal products, industries which revolve around exploitation of animals, laws. In Australia, animals are considered property. In the eyes of our law, animals are objects. Now, can you raise your hand if you have a cat or a dog that you share your house with? Yeah, or any pets like that, right? So they are considered what? Part of the family, right? So that part of your family is a thing in the eyes of the law. It's an object. That's why we can own cats and dogs. There's a money value on them. And so the whole system is set up around this human-centered worldview, which is why we have industries like this, and this is why things aren't shifting as fast as we'd like them to be, because it's the status quo. It's money, it's finances. We can chat more after the few suggestions. Yes. Capitalism.
Marketing, advertising, selling goods and services.
Yep.
I received a contribution 600 A4 type papers if you pay for them now in my mailbox every week. What a waste.
Yep.
It's totally unnecessary, and it's just the capitalism to get our money.
Yep. And so we are the most important cogs in the system as individuals, as consumers, because we promote these products, we consume these products because we're told to eat them and consume them out of necessity, and we keep the system going. So if we remove our influence, we can really start shaping things up. And so the movement of veganism and plant-based philosophy and diets has really taken off across the world. Yeah.
So could you comment on humane farming methods or even ideas that there's humane slaughter?
Yeah.
People who move from, standard kind of options to the
Which is what I did, yeah. So, we want to know that what we're doing is good. We don't want to feel bad about ourselves. We don't want to know that we're doing bad things, right? And so when we have the RSPCA, for example, will slap a humane slaughter approved on a bit of chicken, that animal has had its throat slit because we want to eat its flesh, okay? That's what's happening. And so the humane slaughter label is, I really feel, a way to get consumers thinking that what they're doing is actually good and it's acceptable. The welfare laws we have in this country don't grant animals a right to life. The welfare laws actually just regulate their exploitation and their use and treatment. There's a big difference between the welfare and animal rights, where animal rights is we grant this animal a right to live, exist and flourish without our interference. With the dairy calves, as I said before, the law allows us to legally kill baby calves from the dairy industry within a day of them coming to this world with a sledgehammer. That's your RSPCA approved humane way of slaughtering animals. It's not what we think it is, and it's frustrating that things are this way, and when we realise what's happening out there, that's when we need to activate. That's when we need to go, okay, I don't want to support this. What can I do? Yeah. I think I don't want to shoot too much of the next person's time. If anyone has any more questions, happy to chat at the end. I'll just take one more.
I think the next person was at 1:30.
Yeah, I was kicked back 10 minutes or so. So we're gonna, if anyone wants to chat, happy to have a yarn, but thank you guys so much for your time. Cheers.